Hi, everybody. Hi, Rachel. How are you? I know you love the belief seminars. Um, I hope everybody's having a great day. Um, Today is basically the rescheduled webinar from Tuesday. So we're going to talk about limiting beliefs. And what I was thinking is because a lot of people spoke to me yesterday and emailed and said that they are not able to attend today. I know it was like sort of a last minute reschedule and things like that. So um, what I wanted to do today is go through, any beliefs, any places you guys feel stuck, this is the best time to do live examples because it's going to be smaller and more intimate so you can share. Um, and what I was going to do is go through different, I thought this was like sort of a fun thing to do today, is go through different, like I'll talk a little bit about content and specific core beliefs around your emotions and the different 7 areas of life and how to find them. But this is something that I find is just really beneficial for all individuals because no matter what happens, we all have this invisible prison in our minds somewhere. And so when you can find and source what that is and get really good at picking these things up and plucking them out and recognizing what's blocking you, and when you become masterful at that, your whole life starts to sort of unfold in front of you because a lot of these external problems that we find ourselves constantly running into or areas that we feel stuck around, these are because of internal issues that we're not consciously aware of. And so we really want to master the skill of bringing our subconscious content and making it conscious so that we have the capacity to control that and change that instead of that being in control of us without us even knowing. So what I was going to do for fun after I go through a little bit of content was get lots of live examples for anybody who is here if you guys want to share different things, and we'll go through the 7 areas of life. And B, I was going to go through a bunch of the different because I am really caught up on questions inside the forum. I made some videos yesterday to answer different questions, and everything's pretty much up to date. There's only 2 questions I have in there to answer at the beginning of today. So I was going to go through different Facebook forum shares and different things people were saying, and I was going to just help pluck out. And if you guys who are here live want to go through this together and we can look at the different hi Annette, hello, and we can look at the different core beliefs that we see in the way different people are communicating so that people are able to recognize, oh yeah, like this is me here and this is the core belief pattern that I run into. And I want you guys to be able to learn from this webinar not just like what your core beliefs are, but really how to recognize the core beliefs that show up in other people. Because when we're communicating and when we are in a relationship, whether it's a relationship that's a romantic one, a family one, a co-working relationship, a boss relationship, whatever it is, if you are able to recognize the things that are triggering other people because you're very masterful at this tool, it really helps. Like it's just extremely beneficial for communication. So I'll give an example of this for a moment. I think I've shared this example once before, but I worked with a couple years ago, and they, this woman like really loved and cared for this man, and he really cared for her too, and she could see it. But he had these huge abandonment wounds, and she had this really big wound around being unheard. So she would go in and she would try to have a conversation and say like, this one thing's kind of bothering me in the relationship, and she would want to work through things. They'd been together for a decent amount of time, but they weren't really good at navigating conflict. And every time she would try to communicate like what was bothering her, he would be like, fine, you're leaving, just leave. And he would come back and apologize later, but and be like, sorry, I just get really triggered. But she would always run into this roadblock of like, gosh, he can't just listen to me and be present with me when it comes to working through these relationships and relationship challenges. And so she felt more and more unheard, of course. And they would sort of just be in this little cyclical triggering pattern. And so she just learned to recognize, oh, he feels triggered because of the wound of abandonment. And she started to recognize different triggers that he had. And she should be able to invalidate those things in advance. So she'd be able to say, hey, I really want us to keep growing together. I'm really happy in the relationship. And there's one thing that I wanted to work on collectively. And just by prefacing what she was going to say with that, she knew she was bypassing this wound. And so we can become really masterful at communicating and allowing ourselves to be heard when we can recognize different patterns in different people's wounds in advance, and then go and make sure that we're sort of preemptively not allowing ourselves to touch these things so that we can actually be heard better and get our needs met. So this is what I want to focus on today, is like sort of just going through and recognizing different other people's core wounds in the language that they use. So I'll do a quick little review here. If you guys have any core wounds or any patterns and you're here live and you want to talk about the wounds or patterns that you're running into, I'm going to hold space for that first as well, right after I do the content. And then if you guys are feeling pretty good and you just want to let them come up as we go through different individuals' examples in the Facebook forum, then that's wonderful as well, because it'll probably bring some different things up that you guys recognize in yourselves. There's a spiritual teacher, and I forget who it is off the top of my head, but they say there are no new thoughts. And it's sort of this concept or idea that we basically all share the same types of thought patterns, some of us more so than others, but like everybody can relate to not feeling good enough at some point. Everybody can relate to feeling, abandoned or alone. Everybody can, and that may not be a part of your patterning in your adult life so much, but maybe you felt like that in childhood. Maybe that was something that showed up from time to time then, or maybe that's something that you feel once a year, So anything that we're bringing up with other people, you're going to see some kind of mirror reflection in the relationship to yourself too. So when we talk about core belief patterns, most of you are probably very familiar because this has a lot to do with the emotional mastery course, and I really try to get everybody to dive in here first. But what I want you guys to just remember essentially is that we are being imprinted all the time. Our subconscious mind is being imprinted all the time. And I don't like to be hyper focused on too many things. Like, I don't think you should live your life like, oh God, everything's going to imprint me, and like in this sort of paranoid state, because that does, a whole lot more damage than anything else. But it is important to recognize, like, wherever your brain is producing alpha brainwaves, so wherever you're sort of in this relaxed state, maybe after a long day at work and you're on your drive home, maybe when you're watching television, because your brain really gets into that trance-like state when you're watching television or YouTube, these different input things that are basically coming in, whenever you're producing alpha brainwaves and there's repetition and emotion involved, your subconscious mind is being programmed to a certain degree, or we'll say imprinted. And if there's something habitual, those things are going to rub off on you in some form. So let's just say, for example, that you are watching some kind of show every day. Maybe it's like a crime show, and maybe you watch it every evening and it's your favorite thing to do, and you come home and you're really tired from work, and so your brain's not in like beta mode anymore, and you're producing these alpha brain waves and you're watching this show every day. Chances are you're going to, pick up different things from the show. Like, if it's a repetitive thing every day, and if the themes are like suspicion and distrust and things like this, that's going to show up to a certain degree in your patterning. So I just want everybody to recognize like what our imprints are impacting us to a certain degree. And whatever our programs are that we picked up from childhood or early adult life, or, last week, all these different things that we're picking up as we go, all of these imprints, we're either watering the seeds on autopilot of those imprints that we may or may not want, depending on what the imprint is, or we are undoing and plucking the weeds out of the things that we no longer want, or maybe even removing things that we do want because we stopped focusing on them and paying attention to them. So the mind, like, we very much know about like neuroplasticity and how we fire and wire, and we can create new neural pathways, and old neural pathways can atrophy over time. And we really want to be aware of this and use this to our benefit so that we can deeply change anything in the subconscious mind that we don't want to. Because again, the subconscious is responsible for roughly 95 to 97% of your thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors, all these different things. And your conscious mind is roughly 3 to 5%, but we're trying to really push activity more into the conscious mind. Feelings, emotions, behaviors, all these different things. And your conscious mind is roughly 3 to 5%, but we're trying to really push activity more into the conscious mind. To reprogram, how do I come up with statements or proof that aren't necessarily based on things that I do for others, or are those okay to use? That's a really great question. So usually when somebody struggles with unworthiness, they tend to, not always, but be overcompensators. So overgivers, over, trying to prove themselves so much, trying to show up for others so much. And at a subconscious level, it's often that there's this part of you trying to kind of earn your worth in a way, and trying to like get that worth made up for, right? So if I'm feeling unworthy, I'm always trying to compensate because the brain wants to equilibrate. Hi, Tony and Akeisha. And so there's a couple things you want to do when we're reprogramming. It's great to do the things that are you are doing for others, but specifically, and I've mentioned this in a couple webinars before, and it's a really important point, so I'm glad you bring it up. Specifically with the wound of unworthiness, almost reprogramming it, like I am unworthy, at the action or at the behavior level, specifically reprogramming it is almost like indirectly feeding it, because it's like, oh, look, you're going to earn your worth more. And it kind of insinuates at a subconscious level, you have to keep earning your worth through the things you do for others. And one of the best ways to specifically work on worthiness is to reprogram at the behavior level. So think of it this way. If I was in relationship to myself, so if you, Annette, are in relationship to yourself, truly, okay, and you want to show yourself that you matter, that you're worthy, what would you do? You would maybe set better boundaries. You'd maybe do self-connection things more often. You would maybe speak up more, allow yourself to be heard, not avoid standing up for yourself in any situation. Make sure that you put your needs not necessarily ahead of everybody else's, but at least equal to that of everybody else's and the people around you. And this would really demonstrate, like if you're in a relationship and somebody tells you, oh, you're worthy, it's kind of this like transient concept. And so one of the best things when you're targeting unworthiness is to specifically work at the behavior level. So show yourself you're worthy by setting those boundaries, by speaking up, by having those conversations, and sort of to teach yourself through action and acts of service in a way that you are worthy. And so I always, because sometimes I see this too, sometimes I see somebody working on the belief pattern of unworthiness and they're doing the 21-day reprogramming with belief pattern. I am worthy because, and then they go all day and they don't speak up. They put everybody's needs ahead of their own. They put themselves way at the bottom of the totem pole. They don't express their feelings because they're afraid of being abandoned or stirring up conflict. And then they're in this like kind of catch-22 where it's like I'm catch-22, I think, where they are they're showing up for themselves at the belief level, but they're not showing up for themselves at the behavior level. And so they're almost like trying to work on improving the belief, and then they're diminishing themselves in the process at the same time, just from a different angle. And so it's really important. It's such a great question you raised, because it's really important to make sure that when you're doing this, you're also taking care of yourself with actions. And so what I would do is I would go, I'll look for things that make me worthy, and I can definitely do that. And I can definitely use things outside of myself, but I can also, most importantly, show myself why I'm worthy and why I matter to myself. And so I'll do this through 3 actions a day that I can repetitively repeat and show up for myself around, so that I can annihilate this belief, right? And change my relationship to myself in this way. So really great question. So Akeisha says, hey Thais, hope you can help with this. I feel a sense of apathy around my avoidant boyfriend. I find he gives me the green light and then leaves it to me to move things forward, such as living together, etc. I'm feeling resentment building up, and I'm questioning whether I'm over-expecting because of negative limiting beliefs or whether this is a boundary for me. So this is a great question. So it's a question of like your beliefs and your needs coming together, right? So the first thing you want to do in this situation is ask yourself, what is the meaning that I give to the situation? So what do I make this mean about me? And we always want to, I talk a lot about the emotional processing tool, and it has a lot to do with like, let me identify the story first and see what meaning I'm giving to a situation. Let me move that out of the way by questioning it and seeing if it can equilibrate. And then let me get to my need underneath. Because when I'm angry, I might think my need is to yell at somebody. But when I'm calm, I might realize, oh, my need is to express myself and be heard. And then I have the best, most conscious strategy I can use to get that need met. So in this case, I would go like this. I would go, okay, what do I make it mean when he doesn't take action to move things along? Maybe I make it mean he doesn't care that much. He doesn't love me. He doesn't show up a certain way. And that's where you're finding like the belief, the meaning that you're giving to these situations. And that's what you want to work on. Like, do I have proof of otherwise? Do I have proof that he does care? Do I have proof that he does love me? Okay. And then once you've set that to rest and you're feeling like, okay, the emotional charge went down a little bit because you're able to wipe out a little bit of that story, you then go to the need. And what I really clearly see here is that the unmet need is him also initiating, taking action, and moving things forward. And so once you've identified that need, then you create a strategy. So what's my strategy to do this? Okay, well, I need to communicate to him like, hey, I feel like I often give the green light, and then I feel like I'm the only one moving things forward. And I would really appreciate if you could bring something up. And for dismissive avoidance, you really want to give something very specific. And this can also be, if you guys are familiar with like Myers-Briggs type indicator, you'll see as well that like there's J's and there's P's. So we have like 16 different letter combinations. I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but the fourth set is J versus P, and it stands for judging or perceiving. But what it really means is like the judgers, I won't say what it really means, but a lot of what it has to do with like the J's tend to be planners. They tend to be action oriented. They tend to want to think in the future and sort of plan ahead and then take action and create strategies to support that plan. They tend to be quite organized. They're more the driver personalities a lot of the time. And it depends on your other letter combinations too, but that sort of is the impact on the personality to a certain degree. The P's are more like go with the flow, live in the moment. They want to have all possibilities open. They don't really like committing to like a single option and making a plan in advance because they feel like, well, what if I have more information at the time that we do something? You know, if I have more information by the time we live together, we might want to live in a different place, or we might, so they tend to wait to the last minute because the way they process information is different. And often dismissive avoidance are P's, not always, but I would definitely say there's a pattern that correlates with more often than not them being P's. And it sounds like you might be a J where you're like, hey, I want to drive things ahead. I want to get going. I want to move ahead. And then you feel this probably sense of rejection or, like you said, apathy around the situation. So it can also be like a personality trait where the way you process information is different. And in order to move through this, I have this in my personal relationship as well. And what I find to be extremely effective is just to communicate the need like, hey, this is the way I process information. I think this is the way you process information. And I don't want to step on either of our toes. Like, how can we come to a common ground? And sometimes just hearing what the person like really wants to do. I know I'm always going to be sort of the one planning ahead more, but just hearing what the person wants to do and gathering the information and getting clear about the situation can be extremely beneficial. Because I think more, hi Magni, I think more of the problem is probably in like what you make it mean when he doesn't want to move things ahead and how you might feel rejected and things like that, as opposed to it being about you need him to help you plan things, right? That'll be in there too, but there's probably more to the situation there. So that's really important to check in with. And then communicate, say like, you know, get really specific and direct. So make sure you say like, for me, I just need to know that this is something you're truly interested in doing. And I need to know, for example, the top 3 places that you would be interested in living. And we can get more information when we get there as we get closer. But for now, I just need to know that we have the same intentions. And if you sort of phrase things in intention instead of like, this has to be the plan exactly, you're communicating in a way that works for both of you. So I'll do a course about this in the future, like the different personality types and go into it in a little more detail on how they correlate with attachment styles. But for now, that's a good bit of information that should get you started. And then Akisha goes on to say, how do we entangle a boundary from negative belief patterns and things we should be working on in ourselves? Yeah. So the best way to do that, it's a really good question, is to make sure that you work through your story first and see what the story is. Like if I put this belief pattern or post-it note on somebody that I love and I say they don't care about me or they don't love me or they're not interested in me, then it hurts and it becomes really painful and communication becomes this uphill battle. But if you can remove that first and then go to the need, you have a much greater chance of success. So I would definitely go through that piece and then go from there. So I hope that that's helpful. And then I just want to cover a couple other things. And then again, if you guys want to share any other stories or anything that you want to really work through or focus on, then that should be really beneficial. And Annette says, that's so helpful. Thank you. I'm noticing throughout the day how much I can neglect myself. Yeah. I'm working to treat myself the way I would treat. Yes, exactly. And so that can be like, we can be working so hard on these beliefs at the belief and thought level. And then if we don't show up, you're welcome, Akeisha. If we don't show up at the behavior level, then it can be really challenging, right? We sort of undo the things that we're trying to create. So I'm going to share two other little reminders here of content, and then we're going to go through together and look at different belief patterns of posts inside the forum and just work on actually extracting the language and seeing if we can start catching other people's limiting beliefs in the things that they post. Okay. And it'll be a fun little exercise. And again, the more we as human beings are able to catch the beliefs in other people, the more effective we become at communicating and at resolving conflict. Like, it's just so beneficial. So other couple reminders, there are no idle thoughts. Anything we're thinking about repetitively throughout the day is going to program us in some form. Okay. Anything we're focusing on, anything we keep emotionally focusing on is going to program us to a certain degree. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't like plant these painful seeds long ago and we're just still watering them on autopilot all day, whether that's in our thoughts, in our beliefs, or in our actual behaviors and actions. So a really great question to ask yourself is, check in with your internal dialogue, okay? And check in throughout the course of the day and ask yourself, like, how do you feel about the person speaking to you in your mind all day? Do you feel like if somebody else, and you could externalize that, if somebody else spoke to you the way you speak to yourself all day, that you would like them, you would get along with them, you would trust them? Because the different patterns we enact in the relationship to ourselves makes a huge impact on all of the different things in all of the different 7 areas of life. If we're constantly breaking ourselves down, we're not going to trust ourselves. And that's going to show up in how we make decisions about our career. That's going to show up in how we make decisions about relationships. We're going to have self-doubt if we're not showing up for ourselves in a trustworthy way. So another little piece to check in on too is, what was your relationship like from mom and dad? And how did they speak to you? And the things that trigger you about mom and dad, those things that you felt challenged by, what patterns do you reenact in the relationship to yourself? So if mom was super critical, are you critical of yourself all the time? If dad was cold, are you cold to yourself in the way you make judgments sometimes? So check in with those things, because those are all watering the seeds of your beliefs. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to look at, so anybody who's arrived a little bit later, this is our exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Personal Development School forum. I love doing little live things like this. And we are going to look at different shares in there. And what we're going to do collectively is try to find limiting belief patterns that show up in people's language, so that we can actually practice exercising this skill of working through this. Okay. So I'm just going to start with the first couple people, and I'm not going to say their names. I'm just going to give their initials. Okay. And so the first one's actually quite long, so I may not go through all of it, but the first one is from AF, okay, on March 5th. And so anybody who's interested, you can follow along, or I'm just going to read this out loud. You can stay here as well. It doesn't make a difference. So this person starts their first sentence and says, this is actually a great example. Hi, this may be the most stupid question ever, but I'm FA. How do you love someone? Okay. Then they go on to say, I'm just going to read a few sentences and then we'll dissect it together. I'm not capable of falling in love or loving someone. It's foreign to me. Like, no idea. And I also feel anxious to meet the expectation. I often feel like a monster for this. I almost hate myself for not being able. When I was a teenager, it happened, and I was very infatuated for some boy, but I don't define it as love. And now if I catch feelings for someone, it usually stays light, and I'm always ready to leave in the case. I have to say I was never happy with my exes. I never lived a healthy relationship, and I was emotionally safe, or where my needs were met. So maybe even these results, I don't believe in this too much, or I don't give trust or let myself feel those feelings. Okay, so This individual is not a student in the school, but they're a member of the community, like the group. So um, they obviously don't know about core beliefs, right? So I want us to just look at this for a second. If you guys want to share anything you see from the core belief patterns, okay, these are the different sheets. If you guys want to share or guess, I would love to hear your input because I think I saw about 6 right away. So the first sentence, right? This may be the most stupid question ever. So you can hear in the person's internal dialogue one of our core belief patterns, and it's kind of like a not so nice word because I feel like it's a little bit harsh, but it's something that people bring up all the time, and a core belief pattern I found in so many different people, and it's I am stupid. And these are like the reflection of this is like I am an idiot, I am foolish, like these sorts of feelings. And you can hear in a person's language, right? When they start off with something like that, they're already triggered by the core belief as they go to write the question. So I want you to imagine for a second that here's an individual and they're writing something, they're typing something out, and they're already triggering themselves by the belief they've stamped on themselves as they go to do this exercise, right? Excellent, Noof. Excellent job. Absolutely. And you see, like, the unable to love is so beautiful. Um, um, and good job on finding these beliefs. So these are great beliefs, and then we have the core beliefs underneath too, which are like in that chart. So they aren't capable, so you can make that mean I am stupid, I'm unable to love. A big one that I would see there is something's wrong with me. Like I am defective is a core belief. And you're seeing these things, right? Like in this person's language. And so this, God bless this person. And maybe they'll get a chance to see this. Maybe I'll send this after so that you can see and go through some of these things and recognize how these things can be so self-defeating and how these patterns running in our subconscious mind can be really painful. So I'm not capable. Like you hear this too. So we'll talk in 2 different sets. We'll talk in beliefs and core beliefs. Okay. So the beliefs, exactly what Noof brought up. Like I'm not capable. So I want you guys to notice this as well. What happens, and we're super dissecting this so we can see all the results of our own belief patterns. What happens when I meet somebody? Okay, let's pretend I'm AF, and I meet somebody, and I already am carrying these beliefs. So I go and maybe I even like somebody and I'm interested, but I'm like, oh, but I'm not capable of loving. I've sabotaged my relationship in advance, right? So we really, yes, excellent, Magni, I am bad. And that's a great one, right? So you can see the meaning can be in there too. I am bad. And so that would be like one of the core beliefs. And where do we see it? We see that I am bad. Next in the sentence, it says, I often felt like a monster for this. Almost like I hate myself for not being able. So we see all these beliefs, right? And then the other one too, I also feel anxious to meet that expectation. I am not good enough, right? Or maybe I am unworthy. And then the person goes on to say, I never lived in a healthy relationship where I was emotionally safe or my needs were met. So maybe even this results on not being able to trust. So I am betrayed, I could be betrayed, or I am unsafe. And so we see like all of these. I mean, this was a really strong example. I literally just went for the first one that was here, but there was a really strong example of all these different core belief patterns that show up. And so I want you to imagine, like, because our belief patterns create thought patterns throughout the day, which then create emotions, and emotions are made up of neurochemical reactions. And then neuroscience has proven that every decision we make is based on our emotions. When all this stuff is here and we see all these active beliefs just in one conversation, we can imagine that there's a lot of challenges this individual has when it comes to relating to other people. And so it's so important to be able to pull some of these things up and recognize them. So I won't go through the rest of this comment because we got a lot of really great information that's hopefully helpful if this person gets to see it back right in here. But what we want to do is when we recognize and don't just look at this as like in other people's language, look at it our own language, because our language reflects our internal dialogue and our beliefs about ourselves. So look at some of these key words, like when we're self-diminishing, when we're self-doubting, when we're distrusting. These different things reflect what's going on in our own subconscious mind. And when you're in this space, something that's so important for you to be able to do is recognize these patterns, question these stories. Like, and I'll actually go through and do examples of how to question these for a moment. Hi, Ruby. And it just reinforced them because the same outcomes keep happening. Exactly, right? So we get into these really painful cyclical patterns. It's not only about her, but also she is not lovable. Excellent. That's great job. That's excellent. And that nobody will love her. I've been there and still have mother wound. Yes. And so really want to work on that, right? And how do you know you're lovable, Ruby? Because you're showing up so well for yourself, right? You're loving yourself. And it's really important to work on that wound. Because you're very lovable and wise and beautiful and open and all these wonderful qualities. But when we have these things, exactly like Annette said, we replay the patterns without realizing. So what do? We first want to make sure that we show up, okay, and we question some of these stories. Can I absolutely know that it's true that I'm not capable of falling in love with someone? Like, just because I haven't yet, and just because I haven't gotten to that space doesn't mean I'm not capable as a human being, because we need to peel that one out of the way in order to try to have a successful relationship. That's like a huge invisible prison. So what are some pieces of proof that I might be capable? Okay, well, maybe I felt love towards a family member, or maybe I've seen other people who haven't felt like they're falling in love, or sorry, haven't felt like they could feel capable of falling in love, and then they end up being capable later on. And they haven't loved for a long time, but then it does happen for them. Maybe I look at, hey, well, maybe if I didn't have these trust wounds and I felt safe and I could pull those things out of the way, it makes sense that then those could be removing the blocks that are allowing me to open myself and be vulnerable. And one of the most important things here is that what takes us in relationships from like or infatuation to love, or attraction to feelings of sort of like deeper feelings, is our ability to be vulnerable. And our ability to be vulnerable brings us the ability to feel seen and heard and understood and connected to others, which in turn helps us to feel like we're sort of opening the deeper layers of ourselves, and we can do the same for other people. Like, we can receive the deeper layers of other people. And that's really what takes this more superficial or surface, not in a bad way, but just surface sort of attraction, and turns it into deeper feelings, is when we feel like deeper parts of ourselves are seen and loved and tended to and heard and understood. And so, in order to get to that space, it's going to be so important to practice vulnerability. Okay. So the next comment, it's a shorter one, and we'll say it's from BD. And the person says, help, I found a secure man. I'm not sure what to do, which is a cute comment. So let's go for this. So there can be so many different interpretations, but what do you think some of the different potentials are here? Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that, Magni. And it's so important. Like, when you have these different pieces, Maggie, it's so important to recognize, like, if you had a choice, from the beginning of life. So I'm going to read this out loud. So Maggie says, I came on here today having all these inner negative thoughts. I am unloved and not good enough. I despise myself, etc. I feel better now. Loving myself is not easy, though. And really what stands between you loving yourself or not loving yourself is just the internal dialogue that repeats. And if you came into this world, like, you never would have like raised your hand and been like, hey, mom, dad, partners in the future, can you give me these really painful wounds? Can you give me these I'm unloved and I'm not good enough belief patterns, so I can keep repeating them to myself in my 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day, and keep feeling accordingly and experience all the neurochemical reactions that are painful, and then have self-sabotaging behaviors? You would have never asked. These aren't your thoughts. They're not yours. They're your programs. You didn't ask for them. They're not a reflection of who you are. They're a reflection of things that you grabbed along the way of life to protect yourself and remember, oh my gosh, I felt not good enough one time in 5th grade, and I never want to feel like that again. So let me hyper focus on any time that could happen. And then these things get repeated so often that you come to, they get so close to you that you think they're a part of yourself, and they're not your truth. And so just because we've clung to these things and they've been habitual and they've been a normal part of our lives doesn't mean they're us. And so that's why it's so important. And I'm really glad you shared that. It's so important to be able to separate from those, realize like, oh, here comes this painful thought again. Here comes this not so great thing that's trying to rear its ugly head again and hurt me. And I'm going to create that separation, realize that that's not mine. And I'm going to choose a different thought pattern or action towards myself when I notice those things come up. And it can be really helpful as well. It can be really helpful as well to notice the emotions that come up, because your emotions are going to be your alarm bells that are letting you know, hey, something's poking you and it's becoming really painful. So when you can recognize, oh, when I feel unloved or not good enough, I feel despair, or I feel a stinging sense of loneliness, or I feel, the different things that I can imagine you would feel. Notice those emotions, because now those emotions become your friends, because every time they resurface in relationship to those thought patterns, you're like, oh, here comes this feeling again. It's telling me that this pattern is resurfaced. I need to keep separating and questioning it and repetitively choosing a different behavior or thought pattern. And that can be very, very beneficial. So Ruby says, we confuse physical sex for love, and then hater X is a term I dislike. It's what we grew up seeing. Interesting. And so, yeah, or like physical sex for like infatuation, or confusing infatuation with love, right? And I don't want to take away, like, and I'm not saying this to Ruby, but I don't want to take away people's like experiences. I know that some people are like, oh, I felt love at first sight, or all these different things, and I don't want to take away from that. Like, I think that sometimes people can feel these like really intense connections for other and deeper reasons, and all of that. But I think that part of what really makes love is us being able to open these deeper parts of ourselves, and us to be vulnerable, and we have to really get to know somebody, and vice versa, to feel that deeper sense of like, I would say in love, as opposed to just like infatuation. And so it's true. And then we can get these really painful thoughts when that happens, right? Self-doubt, not being good enough for him. Excellent. On the belief pattern, right? Or her. Yeah, excellent. And so 100% in terms of fighting the belief. And so, hi, Jay. Jay says, I build my self-esteem, then feel like an imposter. Okay, great. You see the belief here? Feel like an imposter if harshly criticized or ignored. I then need validation from others, as I don't believe I am good, capable, smart. Okay, so let's just look for a second. So let's do these live examples. I'm going to do both of these here with Magni and with Jay, because they're connected and I think they're really important. So let's look. Magni's first is I am unloved. Okay, so let's really work on the story here. I am unloved. Can you 100% know that it's true that you are unloved, that nobody loves you, Magni? And see, and if you want to share and respond, I know there's a slight delay in when people type the messages, but if you want to share, can you know with absolute certainty that nobody loves you, that you are unloved? Caps, it's a good sign. And if you look for the people who do love you, even if it's through their own way, even if they're loving how they know, right? It's, you laugh because it's like this lightness, right? It's like, oh my gosh, what a painful thing to believe. As soon as you question it, there's a little bit of relief. And then if you look at the people who do love you, who would you say you do love? And I don't want to say this in like a mean way, but I want us to all recognize that when we tell the story, I am not loved, we cut off love and receiving of love from the people who are trying to love us and are trying to give us love and do show up in our lives. We kind of like indirectly invalidate them or that. Your son loves you. Beautiful. And who else loves you? If you have to give two other examples, because we always look for three. And my mom in her weird way, beautiful. And is it possible that your ex loves you in his way as well? And I know that's the one that sort of is the pain point. But is it possible that that person loves you? Because I feel like a lot of the things I see are the things you share. Yeah, good. You guys are putting it together. Also, Ruby, good job. And the things that you share, I feel like sometimes there's definitely a sign of love there that's quite strong, but just not in sometimes the way that would be easier for you, I think. As with a lot of individuals, right? It can, sometimes we don't we're not being loved the way we receive love, if that makes sense, because of different love languages or belief patterns or some of those challenges. Yes, it's very possible. Beautiful. Beautiful, Ruby. My dad loves me, but he was mean to mom. Did not realize the damage he did. Yes. And so these are true statements, right? Like sometimes people can love us and we can know we are loved, but we're not being loved in the way we want. We're being loved in a way that's sometimes painful, right? Or the love can not be showing up in a way that makes us feel safe, for all these different things. But to tell ourselves that we're unloved, we just took a pain point that we're already feeling and we turned it into immense suffering, right? Somebody didn't love me the way I wanted. I make it mean I'm just unloved altogether. So it's important to just like look to equilibrate, right? And so the next one, because this is shared between you and Jay, but I'm going to go through Jay's in a second as well. The next one we'll do is I'm not good enough, right? And you're not good enough. Yes, I agree. It's hard when we have to feel love consciously, but it's also one of the most important things that we can practice doing, because like what's happening when we're not feeling love naturally is that on some level, we're often blocking it without realizing. On some level, we're often in a space where we're literally like not allowing ourselves to receive it. So just notice, right? Like a really beautiful thing you can do around love to take it a step forward is to look at the ways that your son loves you, to look at the ways your mom loves you, like get really specific in examples. And it really is like heartwarming. You'll like, picture your son in your mind and like look at the way he looks at you and imagine his eyes when he looks at you, or he's trying to get your attention, or he's so excited to see you, or he's doing something for you, or playing with you, or connecting with you. Like imagine his face and his eyes and like receive that love. Because what happens sometimes is we're so in our minds and we're like thinking about the past or the future, we're in all these different places, that we're accidentally putting these sort of like gatekeepers up that prevent us from receiving love fully. And so it's so powerful when we can just look at some of those moments and the way that people share love with us or express love or give love. And like you say, my mom in her weird way, and imagine like one of those weird ways, like maybe she does something quirky and lovable, or whatever it might be. Yes, beautiful, Tony. I can see how it might be blocking it with him because of my resentment towards his patterns, and I'm afraid he's too unconscious to do the work. And so notice, right, in the moment that I'm like, oh, he's too unconscious to do the work, I've also become unconscious. I'm judging a potential future and I'm not present, and I'm blocking love. And so can I receive the love and feel that and allow myself to have that? And can I also make sure, because it's not one or the other, you want to be able to actually go, okay, what is the unmet need? Okay, the need is for him to do the work. And from a conscious space, I can go, okay, I'm going to give him 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever it might be that's fair for you, to let the person try to show up, and for you to love and receive what they are doing and keep expressing the need when things aren't met. And that's the only real way, right? Everything else is you trying to get somewhere and blocking yourself at the same time also. And so we do that. Sometimes we block receiving love. Sometimes we block noticing love or noticing how we're good enough. And the only thing you can actually do is keep showing up for the need. You imagining that you resenting his patterns doesn't help you get the need met, and it only causes more suffering. So you want to split those two up, like peel them apart, keep showing up for the need, and keep noticing what is happening and what's there. And then if the need is just not being met, your needs are just not being met after a certain amount of time and you've tried, then and you have your answer. But anything else just adds pain adds more suffering to what's already painful. I'm glad that's helpful, Tony. Okay, I'm gonna go back up. So Magni being good enough. So Magni, I would love to see 2 or 3 things that show you how you're good enough. And I will share a couple that I see. I see that Magni loves like wholeheartedly, like just so powerfully. And I think that that's a really beautiful blessing and a really great gift. And I also see that Magni's extremely smart and insightful in how she shows up and asks questions. And I noticed right from the beginning some of the like fearful avoidant questions, and just all the depth of like diving into things and wanting to understand and put things together and understand, not just for you, but for I think the people in your life that you love. And I think that those are some of the most tremendous qualities. And Magni, if you feel comfortable sharing, anything else that makes you feel good enough, or if anybody else has noticed anything about Magni and why she's good enough and wants to share anything, then that would be beautiful. I already gave like a 3 in there, but I'm going to wait for you guys to type, and I'm going to go back and answer some of these earlier questions. And so what you want to do, right, is look for these pieces, like look for, don't just question the story, but look for the pieces of proof and look for specific examples, like times you were good enough. That time that I really showed up for my son, or that time I really showed up for my husband, or that time that I did something really powerful for myself in my own life. I know I'm a very good mom. That's beautiful. And you're welcome. It's true. And so you want to come and you can ask for support from other people too. You can ask people, hey, how am I good enough, or friends or family or things like that. But it's most important to start with yourself first. So, okay, so I started with Jay's, and then we went to doing more live examples instead, and I came back. So, Tighties, I build up my self-esteem, then I feel like an imposter if harshly criticized or ignored. I then need validation from others as I don't believe I'm good, capable, or smart. So it's the same thing. It's I am not good enough, right? And I want to pull up the belief here that says I build up my self-esteem, then I feel like an imposter. So if I'm harshly criticized, or ignored. So if I'm criticized or ignored, I want to peel those into 2 parts here and do a different type of live example. So I want you guys to notice the meaning we give to it, because like, let's, and I'm not saying this in like a comparison way or anything like that, so please don't take it this way, but I had to work on my relationship to criticism as a human being at one point as well. And I heard one time, I would say I always took criticism pretty well, but fearful avoidance, I think, sometimes do. But certain things, no. And, but everybody has to, like, no matter what. And I heard this beautiful quote. It was like a line in a book somewhere, and I wish I could remember who it was, but it said, criticism is an immense gift for those who are interested in self-realization. And I remember being like, oh my gosh. And it helped me to shift my relationship to criticism pretty much altogether. Like, if somebody criticizes, it's an opportunity, it's a gift. And all I have to do to make it a gift, to allow it to be a gift, is to ask myself, like, pause and really ask myself, is that true for me? And actually consider. So if somebody says to me, one criticism I get all the time on YouTube, this is just the first one that came to mind, is you talk too fast. So I have to pause and be like, maybe it's not like a criticism, maybe it's more like an observation, but I have to pause and be like, is that true for me? And the answer is yes. I definitely think I'm a bit of a fast chatter when I get excited, but that's sort of how I present things. And then the question is, like, is that something that I want to work towards changing? And the answer for me at this time is no, because it's just my natural sort of genuine state. And because there's ways for people to slow it down on YouTube or things like that. So it was sort of like, no, I think that would take away from me being able to answer questions on the spot if I'm focusing on these different things. But it's a gift. It's an opportunity to realize. And I might revisit that at some point and go, okay, it's time to work on that more, or it's time to, so it's this opportunity for a gift. Or if somebody says to me, you're a mean person, I might go, okay, I have to sit with that one. Am I a mean person? And I might look and be like, there's not really anywhere that I feel that I'm mean to people. Maybe when I was a kid and I was in pain, I did mean things, and I can own that. Said mean things back to people when I was hurt, or to people in general when I was hurt, or those sorts of things. But in my life now, I don't feel that. So, but you get this opportunity to look. And to be honest, I feel like that's the only way to build a healthy relationship to criticism is to use it as a gift instead of have it used against you, right? It takes a lot of like, what's the word? Like courage at the beginning, because it's like, ooh, like it's kind of scary. But ultimately, it's like one of the most powerful things to be able to do. And so that's one thing. And it's like you get to be in charge of that relationship there. But then the other part is like, okay, so what do I make criticism mean? Do I make criticism mean that I'm a bad person? Or am I hurt by what the type of criticism is? And I take it in and I make it real and I make it mine. And I make it that this is who I am and I'm stamped this way with a scarlet letter forever. Like if somebody says, you're not capable or smart or whatever it is, right? Do I make it mean that that's just me forever? And like one of the first things I'll say is like, Jay, you're another person. I think I just noticed all these wonderful and powerful questions. Like you have all these insights when you share things, and some of the things you post or share have been like, I think really beneficial and useful to others. And so absolutely capable and smart. Like it's so interesting for me as like the objective bystander to see these stories, right? Because I'm like, wow, I there's this, you got trapped in the illusion of what's not true, right? Maybe if somebody said to me like, you're not smart at math, I'd be like, that's true. I struggle there. And then I can choose, do I want to work on that area or do I want to keep working in other areas of my life? And you can choose, but you always, criticism is a gift if you let yourself have the opportunity to look. So what do I make criticism mean about me? What do I make it mean about me when I'm ignored? Do I make it mean I'm unlovable or I'm unworthy, or all these different pieces that you want to check in with, right? Yes. So sorry, I'm just scrolling through the comments. Hello, you have a Mesophista. That's a cool name. I wouldn't call it a criticism, though. That's an obstacle for foreign language speakers to understand you. I agree with that. You know what? I didn't really think about that, to be quite honest. So that's a really good example. Like you gave me maybe not like a criticism, but like a different point to my perspective. And so maybe I'm like, okay, maybe I should be working on that. I'm going to think about that and how to be better in that area. Because you're right, there's different people who speak foreign languages, and it's a challenge for those people. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. So all these different angles, right? They give us like gifts and different insights into ourselves. So okay, I have to catch up here for a second. So I am feeling, and thanks for sharing that, Jay. And remember, like, there's this, I shared this a long time ago too, but if I say to somebody, like, you're a purple monster, it doesn't matter how many times really I say that to somebody, you're probably not going to believe that, right? Because it's probably not going to hurt you because you don't already believe that about yourself. But if I say something that is a pain point, it's going to be painful. So criticism hurts when there are things that we are still feeding inside of ourselves. And if something's hurting you, you want to recognize, okay, there's still some kind of lingering belief there that I want to keep working through and working on. And I also wouldn't give people too much power over you, in the sense that it's okay to look for validation from others and to reach out and to ask and be vulnerable. It's a beautiful thing to do. But make sure too that if maybe you have, like, I remember you shared something about a friend once, Jay, and the friend wasn't very nice. And I remember reading the message and being like, that's just an unhealthy friend, or that friend is acting unhealthily in this moment. And it was about you, like, changing a plan or something like that. And the person took it so personally and kind of criticized. And check in too, like, is there, that's part of the checking in around criticism, is this a fair opinion to be listening to? Like, let me look. Am I whatever these things are the person said? And is this a reflection of me, or is this a reflection of how this person handles their emotions and their anger? And it's good to check with all fronts, right? Okay, so Tony, we shared, I'm getting resentful of his not following through on what he's agreed to do. Bottom line, I want him to be someone other than who his behavior demonstrates. I've been vulnerable and clear, which is big progress for me. Excellent. He's agreed to initiate and do work on our communication, then doesn't follow through again and again and again. So the approach I would take is I would be like, I'm giving a window. I'm not going to put up with this forever. Maybe it's been a while. Maybe I'll give it 2 more weeks. And every time that he doesn't follow through, I will gently remind him. Every little time, I'll be like, hey, I just noticed that you're not following through on communication. Just a gentle reminder, this is specifically what I need you to do in this situation right now. Are you open to trying? And I would do it, and I would do it, and I would do it. And if I don't see it happen in that 2 weeks, maybe it's time to go. And I know it's like, it sounds like kind of harsh and whatever, but I've seen you doing the work, Tony, and yeah, he's FA and he's way on the avoidance side. Yeah, so it can be tough. So maybe give him tools, like Like, how can you try to communicate in this moment? This is what communication looks like. Can you share what you're feeling and keep trying, but then let the person know without an ultimatum first, but then maybe at the end of the 2 weeks or the time period, hey, I've really been working on this and it's not working, and this is like a deal breaker for me. And so do you think it's possible for you to change this? Like, if you're not open to doing it and practicing, then I might have to think of something. I might have to move in a different direction, right? Because you have to look at yourself too, and ask yourself truly, like, is this a deal breaker? I know for myself, I think it probably would be, because communication is just so important in a relationship, and so check in with yourself and really see there, right? Um, I'm not good enough is a big one for me as well. Yeah. And so I'm not good enough will spill into all areas. I'm not good enough will be like in our romantic relationships, in our work, in our finances. And it'll show up, for example, in different ways. Like, I see a lot of people who carry that I'm not good enough. They're like, I don't have enough money. I don't make enough money. I don't save enough money. And the whole premise is like not enough hiding beneath the surface, but it's showing up in different forms. I'm not smart enough, but that can also be a core belief if I am stupid. I'm not capable. These are all like these pieces, right, are rooted in the belief of I'm not enough. And when we're focusing on that, like when you see that coming up, it's so important to check in with your internal dialogue throughout the day. It's so important to recognize, like, when do you have self-diminishing or self-defeating thoughts, and let's work on correcting those. And we can do a pattern interruption. So if we see that happen during the day, we can go cancel and intentionally create a new thought pattern instead, and show up for ourselves in that way too. And love hurts is a core belief. What we have seen growing up, either we mess it up to make it hurt or go for hurt ones. Then if it does not hurt, it is not love. It's a really great point. If that's what you saw in childhood, right? And then, oh, love is supposed to be painful and tumultuous. And so that's a huge belief to work on. That's not a core belief, but that's a huge belief. And I think Nof was mentioning beliefs earlier. And like, I want to focus on these two parts because sometimes we don't need the core beliefs to do the work. Sometimes it's just a really painful belief. And it's like, whoa, that's really important to recognize there. And so that's another really great belief pattern to see there. So good job. I'm good with people and being able to be there for others. And I'm good at learning, growing, and understanding. Beautiful. Those are beautiful pieces there. Thank you for putting that there because it's true. Okay, hold on. I just skipped up too high for a second somehow. Sorry, sometimes the cursor just jumps up and then I have to re-find where I am. Okay, see the grace in everything. I'm learning this now. The criticism, it's an obstacle. And I'm good at learning and understanding. Also, I don't think you talk too fast. I think it's a good speed. Thanks. I'm fine with constructive criticism. At least the other person is engaged and interested, right? Interesting. That tells you a little bit more about your belief, eh? It's it's like the person cares, they're not disconnected, but calculated put downs and facial expressions have a disproportionate effect on me. Good. So what do you make that mean? Oh, here's something really important. Really important. Also, the more painfully we react to a behavior, the more subconscious beliefs we have about the behavior. There's like a direct correlation. So I'm going to use this as a live example again, if you don't mind. So like, let's say facial expressions. Let's say maybe you're talking and somebody makes like a dismissive facial expression, okay? And let's say it hurts you 4 out of 10, okay? You might just have this unmet need because you're like, oh, I wanted somebody to be present, or I wanted somebody to not, whatever it is, right? Let's say it hurts you like a 9 or a 10 out of 10. You might have this unmet need of somebody being present and with you and not disconnecting, and then have the meaning you give to that situation, which is like, oh, this person thinks I am not good enough. I am disrespected by this person right now. They think I'm stupid. They think that I don't matter. I'm unimportant to them. I feel unloved by them because they treat me this way. And maybe you have all these beliefs you're putting in there. And so when you have, like, you use the word disproportionate effect, the more pain there is, the more beliefs we have under the surface there. And you want to question that because to be honest, I've seen this a lot. Like, I've seen a lot. I don't want to, like, put it all on one attachment style, but most often dismissive avoidants are very, like, they do this a lot. They tend to be irritable a lot because they're in, like, fight or flight mode when they're still in dismissive avoidance space. And that irritability often shows up in their facial expressions, or they're like rolling their eyes or things like that. And oftentimes when I've worked with couples in this situation, I get the one person to ask the other person, like, why did you make that facial expression? Like, to really get to the root of it, because it's not a very great thing to bring into a relationship when people are doing that, right? It's not the healthiest thing when there's, or like you said, calculated put downs. I mean, that's, you probably don't want to be around people doing things like that, right? It's just unfair. And, or it's just like not a healthy dynamic, right? And so when somebody's having these facial expressions, oftentimes what's happening in that person, and I've seen this many times, it's oftentimes a dismissive avoidant feels like they can't get their point across and they can't put their point into words. And then they feel helpless and disempowered and frustrated. And then they roll their eyes because they're kind of taking out that frustration about things that are going on inside of them on their partner. When their partner makes a point and they're having a harder time making a point back, or things like this. So oftentimes facial expressions are not necessarily coming from where we think they're coming from. And I know that's like a stretch for some of you that are like, I know that my partner is irritated. They might be irritated, but they might be irritated for different reasons than you think. And it's so important in a relationship that you're invested in to ask those questions. And they're really vulnerable questions, but they're so valuable. So to be able to say, like, hey, I felt a little bit like wounded or disrespected or not so good a second ago when that was the facial expression you made. And I don't know if you noticed you're doing it, but why did you do that? Like, what were you thinking or feeling that caused that? Because if I don't ask, I'm just going to make a story around it and I'm going to deactivate or shut down or be frustrated. So it's good to, like, bring those things up, but specifically in the relationships that you trust. Like, if somebody's giving calculated put downs, that's just not a healthy person to be around, right? So underneath that, you want to find all those meanings. So maybe you make the facial expressions or calculated put downs mean all these really painful, terrible things. And maybe a calculated put down at its bottom rung, and this is what I've only ever seen, to be honest, is, people don't make calculated put downs when they're truly happy. Like, if somebody's truly happy and they're content and they're feeling, good about themselves, they have no interest in calculating how to put somebody else down. Like, hurt people hurt people. There's a quote that says that. Like, we don't want to calculate put downs when we're in a good space. And so, maybe the bottom rung of the ladder is not that, the person truly believes all this really awful stuff about me, but maybe that person's really hurting inside, and maybe they're projecting, maybe they're throwing things at me, throwing daggers, trying to start a fight to relieve some of their own pain because they're overflowing with hurt, or whatever it might be, right? But we can still consider, we can still look, oh, they said this critical thing, is that true for me? And you can sit with it and ask yourself and use it as a gift instead of a punishment. So great share in there. Oh, hi, Max. Thank you so much. Thank you. Aw. I really appreciate that. So let me see here. That's great advice. You can never satisfy everyone. Yes, exactly. I learned how to speak slow and loud with my students because of my accent. I was trained to do that. Also, admin who trained me told me that I need to learn how to teach American kids with puns. That's cute. Awesome. Beautiful, Tony. Hi, Max. Hi, Oslam. We have like half an hour left. I always stay for like half an hour after. Hi, WL Hong. I think there was a change because there's a time difference. I don't know if you guys knew, it's like daylight savings time, and I'm not sure if, like, anyways, I won't go into it because I don't exactly know, but I think daylight savings time happens in some areas of the world at different times than others. I recently kind of discovered that. So don't worry, and we're glad you're here, and I hope you're feeling good. And thank you so much, Max and Tony. Thank you, thank you. So let's see. Hi, Chelsea. Okay, so, oh, thank you guys. There's all these sweet. Oh, nice. You're on a date a week ago. That's really fun. I'm excited to hear that. So here's what we, awesome. My dad would say little and let mom do the emotional engagement stuff. He was very loving and warm, but would start to resort to put down some facial expressions to disapprove. Yeah. And it's so challenging, especially when it's a parental figure, right? I do not feel a connection, even though I tried my best. Magical connection abilities. She's not been in touch since, but that happens, right? That happens all the time. Just so we're clear about this, okay? Since I see people in their dating lives all the time, and this might not be a fun statistic, to be quite honest, but I'm going to just tell you guys how it is because it'll save you guys a lot of feeling pain or rejection. The general, I started keeping track of this a while ago with people and people who are dating and like trying to get back into dating. Usually it's around 8 to 10 people that you have an interest in, a connection to, maybe somebody that you meet in your workplace or whatever. Usually it's about 8 to 10 people before you find the person that you're going to have a more serious relationship with. It usually takes about 8 to 10 different dates or different potentials for dating before there's actually the person you connect with. And so it's important to realize that, because I think sometimes we get into this space where we're like, oh, you go on one date and then you're like, oh, it didn't work. Oh gosh, dating's so hard and it's terrible and it feels like a rejection. It's just normal because like human beings have totally different programming and belief patterns and sets of beliefs. And so with that being said, right, like we go through and we're going to have different interests and expectations and assumptions, and all these things we bring into dating can be really challenging. And so it takes a little while to find somebody that there's just compatibility with. So I just thought I'd share that. And I'm happy to hear that as well. So let's see. So Oslam, hi Oslam. Thais, I am triggered when I feel people expect things from me as I am burdened. I'm a giving person, but sometimes when people ask me for things before me offering help, I feel I am used. Excellent find. So, why? Because I am constantly pushing high expectations on myself. I am constantly, I'm just saying this how it is because this is the pattern I see without a doubt every time people have this exact piece here, Oslam. I constantly put burdens on myself that I may not have actually wanted to because I didn't check in with my needs. I put expectations on myself really highly. And so when other people do that to me, it triggers me because it's a reflection of my shadow. It's a reflection of how I already act in the relationship to myself. That's why it's so triggering. And I sometimes use myself to overgive to other people. I'm a giving person, but sometimes when people ask me for things before me offering help, I feel used. Also, I don't trust myself to have a boundary conversation if something changes. And so then I also feel trapped. These are the ones that I see, Oslam, because this is a common pattern. And this is a common pattern for like, honestly, a lot of loving and giving people. And so see if that resonates with you. And then what do I do to work on this? I make sure I practice more setting boundaries so I feel comfortable to do so when necessary. I practice checking in with my needs more before offering myself to other people as well. Because I see a lot of people do like, like let's say you have to like do something on a Sunday and you have some kind of deadline or something you have to do, and then your neighbor needs help with something and you're like, oh my gosh, my neighbor, and you go and you do all these things, and then you come back and you're like, oh no, I'm behind, and then you didn't get the time to yourself that you needed to do your self-work, or you did. So make sure that you don't do the self-sacrificial part of this, right? So work on that belief, yeah, and the shadow part. It's when you see it as a shadow, the beautiful part of that is that when you see it as a shadow, you're able to then be like, oh, it's me doing this, and I have the control to set a boundary or to have a conversation just in a really gentle way. Like, hey neighbor, I wish I could help you. Unfortunately, I have a whole bunch of stuff going on, but good luck today. Like, you're able to shift gears a little bit, right? So I hope that makes sense. So WL Hong, A bunch of people liked your question, it looks like. So, not sure if this is off topic, but how would you suggest navigating situations with potential dates who don't seem to have done the work? Great question. So, number one, here's the thing. If you're masterful, and this is what we were doing in like the earlier part of this webinar, and then all you guys had all these amazing questions, so maybe we'll go back to it, but we were practicing going into people's posts in the Facebook group and noticing their language and using their language to find their different core wounds or limiting beliefs so that we can recognize them in other people as well. Because when we recognize them in other people, we can gently ask questions around them to point them out. Or we can, preemptively avoid triggering somebody so that we can get hurt. So for example, if I know that Bob has a core wound around not feeling good enough and I need to give Bob some constructive criticism, like tell him, hey, this is something we really need to work on in the relationship. Now I'm in a relationship with Bob, oh no. If that's what's happening, right, then we need to be able to know that, okay, this person's sensitive to criticism. And for me to get heard in my relationship to Bob, if I know he's a tough candidate because he gets really sensitive to criticism easily, then I have to go about it in a really articulate way in order to get my needs met. So I might go, hey, Bob, and look for some things that are true that I really appreciate about Bob. I appreciate how many challenges Bob's been through in his life and all the different dynamic sides to Bob. And so I might say, like, these are the truthful things here. And then I might say, and there's something I really want us to work on. And here's something that I think you could work on in this situation. So I might just like preface it a little more instead of going to somebody and being like, hey, sometimes you don't listen that well. Can we work on it? Who receives criticism well? I might be like, hey, I appreciate this and this and this. And sometimes I feel this way. And can we work on it this way? And so by recognizing the wounds in somebody's language, you can sort of preface it. So that's one thing that can be useful or helpful is to even if somebody hasn't done the work, if you get really masterful at the work, you really don't necessarily need to date somebody who's doing the work. Obviously, it's like 10 times easier and nicer right out of the gates if they are, because you can have these really conscious conversations. But I also think that as we become masterful at this, we can also introduce these tools to other people, right? We can say, hey, do you feel like you might be feeling not good enough in this area? And I think you're really great. I think you're great here and here and here. And I think that's a common wound that can come up. I felt that way before. And I've learned about this and noticed that it is. And as we get closer to somebody, we can sort of see, like, are they taking to some of the things that we're sharing? Are they open to doing the work at some point? Or are they just not? And are they going to keep pushing their unconscious expectations and emotional dysregulations at us? And if that's the case, then we just have to be able to set a boundary and be like, you know what, maybe if it's been a few weeks into dating and I don't think it's going to be a healthy situation, maybe I have to choose to look elsewhere for people to date. But you can test it out. You won't necessarily know right away. But it's a beautiful thing to sort of get your feet wet and see, and then make a decision after that. Interesting, Max. Yeah, I know you like really, really cared for her. I would look at too, like, what are the things about her that I'm holding on to, and how can I integrate those things into myself a little bit more? Because I think sometimes it's like you can, when we're holding on, and there's a part of that, not like really strong, but I think a part of that, what am I holding on to? What were those needs? And what are those expectations? And what are those traits? And how can I integrate those traits, meet those needs for myself, or shift my expectations into like acceptance instead of anything else that's there? I would love to hear more about that. I'll do a webinar. I wonder if I put one in the schedule that I posted. We'll do a webinar about how to get over a breakup too, because that's a course that's coming out not too long from now. Hi, Shannon. It's hard for me to get to the point of low enough emotional connection to ask the question, what did you mean by that look or that statement? It's so hard to get past those emotions. A low enough emotional reaction. Yeah, so a really great practice, if any of you are finding yourselves getting still like a little like, woo, like triggered by your emotions and they're very strong, and maybe you're like, ooh, I can work through them really well after, but in the moment I still struggle, a really great practice, and it sounds funny, but it's like extremely, extremely effective, is to witness your emotions. So think of it this way, like, when you witness something, you can't be consumed by it because you see it as sort of separate from yourself. And so when we have this like emotional reaction, let's use the example of anger because it's the easiest one. Sometimes we get like overtaken by anger and we feel this anger and it's like, whoa, and it's so strong. And then our immediate response is to like project it, get rid of it like a hot potato, like pass it away from us, right? Get away from us. And so what we want to be able to do is if we witness it and we actually just recognize like, oh, these are just sensations somatically occurring in my body. So I just feel the anger. Oh, it feels like heat in my shoulders and chest, or it feels like coldness down my arms, or it feels like um, intense stirring in my upper body. If you just witness the sensations, you can't witness something and be possessed or consumed by it at the same time. It's just not possible. So by witnessing emotions, we actually break identification from them. And what that actually is, believe it or not, it's not like a form of dissociation or whatever. It's actually the exact opposite. It's us being fully present with ourselves for the first time. We're actually being with ourselves as we're feeling those sensations instead of trying to get rid of them by suddenly yelling or by suddenly turning on the television and avoiding or by whatever it might be, right? So it's a really great practice to do. And you can even like super practice it by doing like sort of a Vipassana meditation on a regular basis. It just practices like wiring in breaking identification with somatic sensations in the body. So sort of sitting and just feeling the sensations that rise up in your body and noticing when you think a thought, what somatic sensations accompany it and what feelings come up with it. And maybe I'll do like a whole webinar on this, just about breaking identification to our emotions and truly being present with them and witnessing them. And in doing that, you'll notice right away that your emotions go from like a 10 or a 9 or an 8 to like a 3 or a 2. Like it's hard to get locked into those emotional reactions when you are not feeding them, because when we're identified with them, then we feed the story and we give the meaning and it becomes very cyclical. So that can be a really good tool to practice so that you can step out of your emotions and then be able to ask those tougher questions without being so overwhelmed by the emotions themselves. It's a really great share, and it gets my wheels turning. I'm like, I should do a webinar on this specifically. So thank you for sharing that. Personal growth is important to me, and I would like a relationship built on empathy and conscious awareness. Excellent. But sometimes I feel like I'm pushing dates away too quickly. I'm expecting too much. And I ask myself, if I can or should allow for others to be where they are on their path, to accept them. Absolutely accept them. It's a really beautiful question. Um, Definitely accept them and then go with it. Give some space and some room. You might be surprised. Some people, like, I think in our nature, all of the things that we do want as human beings, we want to be able to deal with our emotions better. Nobody likes feeling in suffering. Like, we're wired to not be in pain, right? So nobody likes that. We're wired for deep connection. Everybody loves feeling connected through feeling seen and heard and validated in their emotions. People naturally love finding insights, right? It's one of our hierarchy of needs. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. So a lot of these things are like kind of natural for us to be inclined towards enjoying and wanting to pick up. And sometimes we just don't have the tools or we're too far removed. So I find quite often I see people who are really on this like conscious path and doing the self-work and self-realization and learning. And then they sort of go into a space where it's like, oh, I don't know if I can date this person. They're not doing as much work. And then, you might have a couple conversations and that person picks it up quite quickly, or they're interested too. Or so I would say, don't like cut people off in advance. I find that to be a more limiting strategy long term. And try to allow yourself to see and notice too, like see what painful thought and belief patterns come up for you. Maybe you're just with somebody and you go on 4 dates and they trigger the crap out of you. And now you know all these really amazing places you have healing to do because of that experience, right? There's different ways it can play out, but I would say like allow yourself to have room to test the waters, but make sure it's not ignoring your needs either, of course. So great question. Or just specifically really look for people and connect to people who are doing the work, and like go to meetup groups or find people that are in a similar space and headspace. And that can be helpful also, of course. You're getting much better at setting boundaries with your family. That's amazing. That's one of the hardest pieces of work for an FA to do. And so I think that's wonderful. And family, especially when you're around them a lot, is like the greatest. It's like there's There's a quote by Ram Dass, and he says, if you think you're enlightened, then go spend a weekend with your family. And I love that. I thought that was so funny because it's like no better people to be pushing your buttons. And so when you're around them and you're seeing them consistently, like what happens is you get the best practice. They are your best teachers possible in these areas that there was a struggle with. So I think that's wonderful. Good job. I'm happy to hear that. Bob has too many issues. You shouldn't get involved there. He's DAFA and AA. He's true. It's true. What we feel as long as there is no overthinking. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing too. Sometimes I can't be. Ooh, sorry, my thing just skipped. Let me just see. Sometimes I think I can be too perfectionistic with partners, but I think for me it might be a way of keeping emotional distance. Do you feel that? Yes, this is common as well. I just spilled tea on myself. This is really common. I think this is a really beautiful point that you raise. Sometimes being perfectionistic with our expectations, I actually talk about this in the advanced DA course, is a subconscious deactivating strategy. And it comes up in the fearful avoidant course too, actually. And so sometimes it's our way of like, oh my gosh, this is a part of me that's deactivating and trying to keep space. It's not always that way, but it's very common. So that's wonderful, Max. Very sweet. I went on a date after PDS and brought up all the self-awareness stuff. She called me a preacher and pulled away. I need to be true to myself more than needed a relationship. Good job. I needed to be true to myself more than I needed a relationship. So you showed up. That's so beautiful. I think it's I went through this myself years ago when I was first like learning about all this stuff. I went through a lot of like trying to tell every family member and friend and like probably being a little bit preachy because it was like, wow, this is helping me so much. And I think a lot of us who have a high personality need around emotional connection, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much and I'm learning and noticing all these things and I just can't wait to tell other people because you want them to feel good too because you care about them and like you want to share. And so I think that can happen a lot. And one of the hard lessons I think to learn is like as you have all these recognitions and realizations, sometimes people are ready to listen and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just aren't open. Sometimes they have a really high personality need around security and their function and focus is around maintaining security and not expanding outside their comfort zone. So they don't want to look inwards and they don't want to do these different things. I also don't love that the person said that to you. I mean, I think that's a good sign that is somebody could have been like a little bit more kind or like, so I think that's a good sign you showed up for yourself and didn't dive into that relationship. But that can come up sometimes, I notice, and it's not uncommon. So okay. So what I'm going to do, awesome, Shannon. Yeah, it's a really great practice to dive into. Okay, so what I'm going to do here just for fun, I think you guys are chatting a little bit. Yeah, you want to preach. I think you guys are chatting here a little bit. So if I missed any comments, wow, the guy came by to check for his mail. He trashed your apartment. I screamed at a man yesterday. I was thinking of shadow work. He's trashed my father's apartment and I spent my free day helping him clean it up. That's a little bit crazy that he trashed your father's apartment. I think this might be related to me having an idea of what people are supposed to be like. Yeah, an expectation. Or also, what do you judge him as? Do you judge him as rude, unsafe, like these sorts of things? I would check that out as well. I think that's important. And see if that shows up in any way in your shadow also. It might be a shadow piece in there that was triggering. Or I don't know if this shows up for you at all, but do you ever trash your dad in your thinking? Because that might be something as well that's part of the shadow. It's interesting. When things like this happen and they're really triggering, there's definitely some like really good golden nuggets in there. Okay, so this is a great share as well. Hi, Pamela. So I'm going to answer Pamela's question. Then I'm going to go through, just for those of you who came in a little bit later, I'm going to go through this fun game that we were playing. And it's about noticing people's language and how it reflects different core beliefs or painful belief patterns they have about themselves. Because I really want everybody to take that away from here. It's so important to recognize belief patterns in other people so that we can do the work around them. So we can recognize and we can preface and we can shift our communication style and we can notice what can trigger people. And it's a great thing for the workplace or all these different things as well. So I'll go through that. Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear of that experience too. That doesn't sound like a very fun or safe experience. It could also be like, I just saw your other part of the message. I must have skipped over it. Didn't help or anything, as if he didn't care. He doesn't care could be a really core wound and painful thing as well. Disrespected, you could make it mean, like unsafe. These are things that come to mind. Helpless. There's probably a lot of core beliefs and some shadow pieces in there. So I would do like a sort of deep dive into it. I know you know the tools really well. And I am sorry to hear that. So Pamela says, as an FA, I confused sex for love because that was what I saw growing up. I've been working on this. What underlying beliefs am I not clearing for why this still shows up? So this is what I would do. I would write out how you confuse sex for love. So what you make sex mean. I don't think it's just a belief. I think there's also like some needs in there that are being met that are probably deeply unmet in certain areas of your life. Like, I don't think it's just a belief piece. It's a great share. But I think there's needs that you're probably not getting met in other areas of your life as well. And so when these needs are met, it creates this these sort of breeding grounds for like intense infatuation, and that intense infatuation is what we can confuse for love, right? So we'll go through. So what do I believe about sex and how it is like love? Because there's vulnerability in sex, and sometimes fearful avoidants have a hard time being vulnerable, and yet they really want to be vulnerable. So when sex has that vulnerability, because like, let's just be honest, you're naked and you're like expressing yourself in a way, and there's just a very vulnerable part of it. Then there's that part. And I might confuse it for love because it might also be I'm just saying things that come to me that are common with fearful avoidant patterns. It might also be that fearful avoidants have a strong love language around physical touch. So you're actually receiving love through physicality, right? And so it's your love. It's not actually love necessarily, but it's your love language, right? And then you might also have core belief patterns. You're caring about yourself, like, I'm not good enough. And this is, I hate to say this, like this is just common with fearful avoidance. I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy or strong. So sometimes when you get full presence from somebody, whether that's through conversation or whether that's through sex, when somebody's like fully present in that space, you're like, oh my gosh, somebody's being fully present with me. So they're filling my cup of feeling like I matter or I'm good enough or I'm worthy. And so that can show up. And so sometimes it's these two parts. It's the needs that sex is meeting, that your subconscious mind is probably hungering for, like physical touch. Maybe if somebody's affirming, like words of affirmation, if they give you compliments or things like that, then that can be all like these needs that are getting met that you might be hungering for in different parts of your life. And so that's why those things get confused, because it produces this very intense infatuation. That's what happens when we get these deeply unmet needs met. So that part. And then the other part is the beliefs I'm carrying that put sex on a pedestal this way. So the ones I carry about sex, but also about myself. So again, those things like, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy. And so when somebody does bring that in, it becomes this really big deal for me. And then my subconscious mind latches on and tries to hang on to this experience a lot more. So I hope that that's helpful. That's a really great share, and it's very common. And it does, like Oslam says, great insight. It's most common for fearful avoidance. And think about it too, like fearful avoidance have their anxious and avoidant side. They hunger for connection, but they're afraid of it a lot of the time, and they're afraid it's going to hurt. Sex is like one of the only things that kind of bypasses that, because you can have the vulnerability without having to do the emotional vulnerability piece. And so you get the vulnerability and the connection, but you don't have to like move through all of your core fears and beliefs and deactivating side. And so it can sort of create this dynamic where you're like, wow, I can get my needs met without having to go through pain or distress. And so that's another part of why that happens. It's a really great question and a great share, because there's so many beautiful layers to understanding that. Okay, so let me just see. Common for FAs. Yeah, if I keep repeating a pattern, Ruby, it's a good share too. If I keep repeating a pattern and I'm like, I need to speak more softly, but it doesn't happen, then I have some kind of subconscious either need that's being met through not speaking more softly, or I have some kind of belief about what it means if I do speak softly. Maybe if I speak softly, I'm weak and I'm afraid of being weak. And so I don't do that, right? So it can be, you see that pattern. So it could be a belief that you make, that you connect to speaking softly. And so your subconscious, even though consciously you're like, I should do this, your subconscious has an ulterior motive essentially, right? Yes, I think it was about him not doing his part of the work, relationship, not pulling his weight, not caring, not seeing his needs, causing me more work. Very much related to my father, I believe, as well. Yeah, so I'm not cared about. These are the core beliefs in here, right? I'm not cared about. If he's not pulling his weight, often the core belief is like I am disrespected, or I am alone, or abandoned. So we've got a lot of really painful potential beliefs in here, which is, we were saying earlier, the more core beliefs you have on a situation, the stronger the emotional response will be, the more painful the situation will be. So not pulling his weight could be I'm disrespected, I'm alone, I am abandoned. So we've got like a few in there that are potential. Not caring about me, I'm not cared about, I don't matter. I causing me more work, so inconveniencing me. Now I have all this extra work to do and I'm going to be behind. Maybe I'm helpless or I'm trapped. And then related to my father as well. So there could be a shadow part there. And so there's all these painful beliefs in there that happen all at once. And that's when we get those stronger emotional responses. It's a really great space. This is a great question, Noof. So Noof says, Tidies, from a healed space, how high on the scale will our emotional triggers be? What's a normal response to a hurtful thing if it's not related to our shadow? It's a beautiful question. From a healed space, so this is, I'm just going to tell you, like, I've done a lot of work on my core beliefs and internal dialogue, and the things I see from other individuals as well. You'll see, like, sort of the rule of thumb is that pain is an unmet need, and pain will always exist. Like, you're not going to ever get rid of pain because pain is there to help us grow. So like maybe Bob goes along in life and maybe Bob's done tons of work on his stories and he's pretty healed, and then maybe Bob suddenly realizes that he has been really focused on his family and friends and wants to empower his career more. And maybe he starts to feel painful, like, ooh, I'm not as far ahead in my career as I want to be because I'm not truly doing something I love, or whatever it might be, right? So that pain is going to be a gift because it's going to force him to move. Pain should never really be more than a 5 out of 10. 5 is like when there's a lot of unmet needs, but usually we're looking on a regular basis at like a 3 or 4. Suffering is whenever we have a shadow, like you're saying, or we put a story around our needs, and we have these triggers and pain points. So pain is always very manageable. Pain will feel like a discomfort, and it'll be like, ooh, okay, there's this push or this pull to move in a different direction for something, and that's supposed to be very helpful and beneficial for you. And suffering is all the meaning we give to the pain, or all the shadow triggers that create the pain, right? So good, great question. Jay says, so recognize the sex equals vulnerability link. Without it, just skipped it. Without it, the emotional connection widens. I behaved in this way and regret my behavior. Yeah, it's hard, right? Like sometimes your brain just trying to get whatever needs met it can. So there you go. Good job, Pamela. I feel not good enough. I also feel like I can't sustain a full relationship though, even though I want one. So there's another, I want you guys to notice this too. Our needs and our beliefs are interacting. And this goes for Jay too, right? Like you guys are sort of saying a similar thing. It's like this. Sex is easy, intimacy, now that's difficult. Yeah. And so so I'm trapped if I stay. Yeah, good job. You guys are finding these really well. So Tony, so here's what happens, right? The brain has its needs and its beliefs interacting. So like, let's just say, for example, that let's pretend that we'll say Bob again. So let's pretend his highest need is safety, security. And let's pretend that Bob truly believes that skydiving is safe. Bob might go skydiving. Let's say you take most people who have the highest need of security or safety, they're probably not going to go skydiving because most of them are not going to really share a belief that skydiving is safe. But if somebody truly believes that enough, they're going to go. And so our needs and beliefs are like always interacting together, and they're determining our behavior. Those are the two core things that determine how we feel and how we behave. And so when we go through life and let's say we need emotional connection, we need connection, which is very true for fearful avoidance, but we believe it's unsafe. We believe vulnerability is really hard. We believe that we're not enough. We believe all these things, like I can't sustain a relationship. Then like how does our brain get its needs for emotional connection met? Well, sex is a great option, right? To your brain at the time. And then we might consciously know, oh, this is end up being painful later, or it's blocking me from progressing into a full relationship because I go for the shortcut first, or I don't take the time to get to know the person I would want the way I would want to, or whatever it is, right? Or I stay in a situation with an old ex that I don't want to be in anymore, but it gets my needs met, or whatever it is, right? So you want to work on those beliefs that are there first about relationships, not just about sex. I see here for Jay and for Pamela, and about your ability to stay in a relationship, be in a relationship, so that you can then get the need met that you truly want from the more conscious perspective. So great shares in there. Okay, so the last, yeah, and thank you. I agree. Thank you for sharing that and being open about that, because these are really important conversations. These are common things. These are things people go through and are challenged by. And so I really appreciate when people share these more vulnerable pieces, because it's a great opportunity for people to go inside themselves and notice these different patterns as well. So Pamela and Jay both, thank you for sharing. Exactly. Awesome. I love that. Safer for me to be physically intimate instead of emotionally, right? So because of what beliefs you have, what are your beliefs around emotional connection that prevents you from feeling that way, right? So beautiful. So I'm going to do this one last thing. I'm going to pick another post in here, and we're just going to go through and notice the language, okay? And then I'm going to run and let you guys go for the day. So we have AL inside of the Facebook group. And so this person says, I just wanted to share feelings and maybe get some feedback. Today it's been exactly 3 months since my ex told me he needs to be alone, and we basically broke up. As background, he's FA with a history of childhood sexual abuse by his father, who died 1.5 years ago. Things had been great for almost 7 months. Then he started to shut down as we got closer, I guess. He's told me he's missing the person who abused him, his dad, and he realized that he has unresolved issues. And he's not done grieving and can't be in a relationship while taking care. I was crushed by this, but I acted very mature and supportive. I didn't argue at all. I told him we'll set him free if that's what he wants. He said, thank you for your understanding, but then he asked me to let him know and I want to catch up. I said, I'm not open to being just friends for now, and I'm not sure when I'm ready. He said he was sad when he heard this, but then he left my house. That fine, and I think there's a typo. I made it clear in a vulnerable way that I love him and I hope he'll take his therapy seriously and take care of himself. Since then, I've been contacted 3 times. Fast forward. Okay, so fast forward this week, I met a new woman in a social group. And although I didn't intend to, I ended up telling her my breakup story, to which she said she thinks I was too harsh. Okay, these are where we find the core beliefs. Where she thinks I was too harsh and let him go and gave up too easily and closed the door on him. I had thought about this before and was comfortable with the way I acted, but I did have some regrets, to be honest. And I think that's the bargaining stage of grieving the loss. Now she opened this wound again, and I started to obsess again about what I could have, should have done. And this person goes on to say, what do you guys think? I need some encouragement. So, and we'll share this video with her. So this person is feeling what? Okay. She goes on to say, did anyone have a similar experience with this kind of breakup and reconnecting with someone like this, and after how long? She says, I definitely still love him and I want him back if he was closer to being healed, but I think that's far from now, judging by the way he reacted and pulled the plug so unexpectedly. So I don't actually see a ton of core beliefs in here, but I do see just in that one specific paragraph, she's sort of more sharing a story by the facts than anything else, instead of like an emotional share. But we see the core beliefs come in with, I have some regrets. and I started obsessing about what I could have, should have done. Okay. And this person who triggered her, the woman who triggered her, said, "You were too harsh and you gave up too easily and closed the door." Okay. And so, what are the different belief patterns that this might show for another person? I know, and I'm sorry for the person who was abused by their dad too. And so what are the core beliefs that we might see? So in somebody's language, whenever they're like feeling triggered, so we get to the triggered part when this person shares that they're obsessing and they're stressing about what they could and should have done. We want to look for what we noticed about the beliefs in somebody else's language and somebody else's share to be able to see, okay, what's triggering them? Because when we can become really adept at like what's triggering us and what's triggering somebody else and start to move between the two, communication gets very easy by comparison. So I see in here, I was too harsh. Okay. First core belief I see, I am bad. Right. Another one it could be common. I was too harsh, so I made a mistake and I failed. And so I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy, or I'm stupid or foolish, right? I gave up too easily. Can be something's wrong with me, or I'm defective, right? Or can still be like I am a failure. I made this mistake. And then this person's doubting themselves. So I thought about this before and was comfortable with the way I acted, but I did have some regrets. And so this person's starting to doubt themselves. So it could be, again, those core belief patterns of I am stupid, like sort of foolish, right? Or again, I lost this person forever. Like I made this mistake and I failed and I lost this person forever. So I'm alone, I'm abandoned. And so we see all these different patterns that are possible there. The ones we can basically know for sure are like, I was too harsh and I gave up too easily. So something's wrong with me, I am bad. And so these, or I failed, right? And so you want to just recognize like the different potential patterns in the way somebody's communicating, because you can see their triggers, right? And now when we see somebody's triggers, we can question those stories. So, can I truly know? And to be honest, as I read this story, like my personal opinion on this story is that the person asked to not be in a relationship. They said they needed to go heal themselves. They said like, I'm not able to show up right now. It's very self-sacrificial, to be honest, if you don't feel like you can be a friend, and this person, it's not like this person's out on their own. Like this person is obviously seeing a therapist and they have some support, and they're doing these different things. And so then you take no contact. You just tune into your needs. If this person's not available, and if they're telling you that they don't want to be in a relationship and they need to focus on themselves, well, if you, in response to that, that's not what you wanted, but you need space to heal, the only feasible solution is to take that space to heal. And you can keep redefining that. Like maybe 6 months from now, you can reach out and be more of a supportive friend and check in once you've done your healing. But it's not really going to do any good for you to sacrifice what you need in order to fit yourself into something that you think somebody might expect from you. What's probably going to happen long term is you're going to feel frustrated, resentful, and then maybe lash out at that person who's just trying to heal. And it might do more damage long term, or you might be angry or be hot and cold to the person. So you have to tune in and be truthful to yourself. And of course, it's so scary and hard that that person is going through that and had the childhood sexual abuse. But I've seen a lot of experiences and examples where one person goes, oh, well, because they went through something more painful than what I've ever gone through, I have to be there in a way that's not true or not right for me. And to be honest, it always turns into a toxic relationship. So your conscious mind might say, okay, at some point, I would like to try to be friends and support. And maybe I even send like a really kind, loving message saying, I really wish I could support you, but I don't think it's going to be healthy for me at this time. But we have to tune into our needs as human beings first. And so these core beliefs that show up for this person, like I'm not good enough, or I'm bad, or, whatever, I failed, I'm now alone, whatever core beliefs show up, you want to work through those, and you want to make sure you're tuned into your needs, and you can always check in as you go along. And that's really important to recognize. And I think sometimes a lot of fearful avoidance specifically can fall into this trap because we love so fully and we feel so much, especially for others. Sometimes we'll go, oh, we have to disown our needs because they're in more pain. And when somebody's in more pain, it takes precedence. And I just want to let everybody know that will always set a tone for a toxic dynamic long term. We always want to have compromise instead of sacrifice. Okay. Great shares in here. I cannot love. I do not understand. I have no patience. These aren't the core beliefs, but these are definitely really painful beliefs here. Great job, Ruby. I feel I need for validation. It doesn't feel like it helps to validate myself. So when my head is completely chaotic and it's just a mess, I feel a need for validation. I feel like it doesn't feel like it helps to validate myself. My brain won't calm down the way it does when others do it, especially someone who loves me. So I don't think you need validation. I think you need connection. I think you're needing connection more. I don't know how to change this or work on this. So great, great question. I just saw Max and Ruby's interaction. So great question. So one of the first things you can do, and we were talking about this earlier, I'll do a full webinar on this. When your mind is chaotic, the only real way out, truthfully, that's going to reprogram is first to witness your emotions. Like, you want to be able to witness and make that separation and distinction, and then sit down with a pen and paper and work through the stories. It's not the validation. The validation's underneath. It's like a need validation and connection, but it's not the validation you need. It's the end of the stories, because you have to look, right? What's creating the chaos in my mind? It's all these quick passing stories that are happening, like, I'm not good enough, I'm going to be alone forever, I'm unloved, I'm not cared for. And so, yes, going to somebody else who can then say, you are cared for, that is a good quick fix, but it doesn't help with reprogramming because you didn't change the cause. So what you have to be able to do is sit down with a pen and paper. I know it's hard. So start by witnessing your emotions. Start by just sitting and creating space between yourself and your emotions, okay? And just sit and feel that space, right? Witness the emotions. Where do I feel them in my body? What kind of sensations are they? And you'll feel the emotional charge come down. And then from that space, you can do the work. And it's like, okay, so what are all the things that are causing me pain? And I always say to people, like, the more work you do in the moment, I know it's not easy. I know it's not fun. I know it's a quicker and more satisfying hit of like oxytocin to just get it from outside of you. But unless we master doing the work inside of us, we're not solving the root problem. It's like we're trimming the weed instead of plucking it out at its root, right? And so, yeah, trimming the weed's quick and easy, but plucking the weed out at its root is what's most effective, especially long term, like long-term gratification. So you want to sit down with those stories. And you want to be able to say, okay, I'm believing right now I am unloved. I'm believing right now that I am not enough. Okay, how is this, and especially by the person, it's probably by a specific person. How am I loved? How do they show love? What are specific examples? How am I loved by other people in my life? What are specific examples? And you'll feel that this is where the charge really comes down, is through working through those steps. And there's not really a single other way. And so then you'll be able to get the need met after and go, okay, so what do I need right now? Okay, now I need validation. And then you can go and you can reach out to somebody, but do the internal work first, because otherwise you're targeting like the symptom instead of the root. And so if you're feeling spirally, then just sit and witness your emotions first. If you're downward spiraling, just feel them in your body, take a second, recognize they're just somatic sensations, label what the emotions are, and then go into the deeper parts, okay? And thank you for asking that question. That compromise over sacrifice statement just hit me. My partner disregarded one of our compromises last night because he was hurting, triggered me a lot, and I'm having a hard time because I know he was spiraling because he was hurting. Now I'm deactivating. Make sure you go back and make sure you express that it hurt you. Sometimes it's hard, and I'm going to have to run in just a second, but sometimes it's hard because we can get into a headspace where it's like, this person's in more pain, and so my pain doesn't matter. And like, trust me, I've done this many times. But our job is to, sometimes we can put that person ahead of us in the moment. Sometimes we can go, okay, this person literally is emotionally unavailable, so let me meet some of my own needs and let me question my stories. But it doesn't mean that because I don't speak about it in this moment that I give up on it. It means that I have to come to the table and say, hey, this is something that showed up for me last night when we were having this conversation. And okay, so he went to the places we have agreed not to go to with each other. Sorry, there's more to the story. It hit some triggers for me. I'm trying to heal them. He was out till 3 a.m., drank too much and drove. That's not very good. I was really upset, but he showed up at my house late and told me I didn't deserve that and apologized. It was a boundary crossed, but I didn't know how to stick to the boundary. Yeah, so you got to get really clear. Like, is this gonna happen again? What's sort of the outcome? So you want to just be able to say, like, this is the meaning I gave to it. So maybe you gave the meaning that you're disrespected and unloved or whatever it is, and you need to hear from him that that's not how he feels about you, and you need to hear from him that, like, okay, in sort of invalidating those belief patterns that will help to sort of like seal it all the way through, and then make sure that you have the needs met as a result of it, and then set a boundary again. Like, this is the boundary. If it happens again, these are the consequences. And it's not a threat, but like, you have to make consequences for yourself that are fair. Okay. And then be able to move through it from that perspective. Okay. So when we are sometimes both triggered and we see somebody else in more pain, sometimes we go, oh, they're in more pain, and we invalidate our own pain. And what's really important to be able to do is show up and go, okay, I see that this person's in pain, and I'm still going to hold space for my pain. I'm not going to reject or deny my own feelings and needs. I might have to work on them my own first for half an hour and come back when the person's calmed down, or I might have to go back the next day, but I cannot let that go completely. I have to do the work around it. And it's just a very important piece. I think if someone is saying it and doing the work, time and patience is so useful instead of just giving up, unlike when people just build walls. I think that doing the work is a sign of self-respect to others, too, instead of to keep hurting them. Yeah, somebody posted a really beautiful, you're welcome. Somebody posted a really beautiful post, again, by Ram Dass, and it was in the Facebook group, I think. And it said, the greatest gift I can give to myself is doing the work. And the greatest gift others can give to me is doing the work. And I thought it was cute, but it's true. Because then we're not pushing all of each other's buttons, right? So anyways, okay, thank you so much. Oh, that's so beautiful, Aslam. That's so nice. I like the flowers. It gives you that sort of feel. I can imagine your balcony. And thank you so much, Max. I know it's nighttime there for you. So thank you so much. And yeah, thank you guys all for being here and for doing this with me today, and for sharing vulnerably and being really present and really showing up for one another in here too. It's really beautiful. So thank you all for all the wonderful shares and for being here as always. And oh, quick reminder, we're doing, because a whole bunch of requests have come in constantly for different time zones. So remember, if you looked at the webinar schedule that came out at the beginning of the month, this next webinar isn't Tuesday, it's on Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, if you're able to make it. So Friday at 12 p.m., Saturday, and then we're alternating. So then the next week it's Tuesday, Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. And there's an extra webinar in here this month. So thank you guys so much. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks again. Bye, everybody. Bye, Ruby and Jay and Magni and Aslam and Chelsea and Max and Kim. Bye, Kim. Thank you, guys. See you.